King Tutankhamun was buried about the year 1350 BC in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings at western Thebes, with a whole treasure house of objects around him, a kind of time capsule of his age and culture. Some of these objects are of great opulence and mystery, and most have a strange beauty. Looking at them and thinking about their use and significance, on the needs that commissioned them and the minds that devised them, there is a danger of overlooking the hands that made them with such skill and devotion. In walking with kings and their retinue, there is a tendency to ignore the artist and the craftsman straggling in the rear. Perhaps it is time, therefore, to leave the palace and to visit the workshop.
In fact, the artists' studios were often not far from the palaces. Here is the sculptor Yuti in his workshop within the palace of Queen Ti. He's putting the finishing touches to a statue of the Queen's daughter. A sculptor's studio was found in the ruins of a palace at Amarna, the site of a great new capital city built by the heretic pharaoh Akhenaten, who was the predecessor of Tutankhamun. This plaster head of Akhenaten was found there. Other studies included plaster masks of an unknown woman, an elderly man, and a bust of Akhenaten's chief queen, Nefertiti. There also seems to have been a factory attached to the palace where the art of glassmaking was practiced under royal patronage. This glass bottle in the form of a fish comes from there. Clever craftsmen were held in high esteem, and this stela shows the chief goldsmith of Amenophis III receiving homage from his sons. One of his sons, Paranepher, was also an artist. He worked for King Akhenaten, who gave him an honorary position as his cupbearer. Kings themselves weren't above being considered as artists. King Thutmose III himself designed a set of metal vessels as a gift for the temple at Karnak. In the 6th dynasty, the great officials like Mereruka showed themselves in their tomb reliefs as seated before an easel. Here, Mereruka is painting a representation of the 3 seasons of the Egyptian year. Apart from those of kings and high officials, the works that can be accredited to specific artists are very rare. However, the bust of Nefertiti may possibly be by the chief craftsman Thutmose. A scrap of ivory found in the workshop bore his name and titles and informed us that he was the king's favorite. Fair of face, joyous with the double plume, mistress of happiness, endowed with favor, at hearing whose voice one rejoices, lady of grace, great of love whose disposition cheers the lord of the 2 lands. An ebony head, thought to be of Queen Ti, may well be by the hand of her chief sculptor Yuti. This stela is of Akhenaten's chief sculptor, Bak, and his wife. Bak describes himself as a favourite whom the king had taught. He carved his own self-portrait with the fashionable distortion of Akhenaten's pronounced paunch. From the Old Kingdom comes this relief of the sculptor Niang Ptah taking his ease in a skiff. He's watching the other boatmen who are engaged in mock battles. Niang Ptah was responsible for the designing of these scenes. But otherwise the names of very few artists are known to us. The artist was considered chiefly as a craftsman, and sculptors are often shown as ordinary workmen alongside metalsmiths and other artisans. And, as always, a scribe supervised their work. This stela was carved about the year 2000 BC by a sculptor who boasts of his mastery of various crafts, and also claims to be a scribe, well versed in the divine books. Such books were often kept in temple libraries, and consulted whenever the correct form of a statue or a relief was required to be revived. Over the years, constant repetition frequently caused the artist to stray from the original. In the earliest days of Egypt, when the center of culture was at the city of Memphis, it was the city god Ptah who was the patron of all artistic enterprises. He was said to have made things with his hands as solace for his heart. His high priest bore the title of greatest of craftsmen. Imhotep, the great chancellor of King Zoser, designed the step pyramid about 2700 BC. It was the first stone building of any size in the Near East. On the base of a statue of Zoser, he bears the title of Chief of Sculptors. He too was a high priest, and it was such literate men who designed ancient Egyptian buildings, their decoration and contents. Later there were workshops under the patronage of other gods besides Ptah. Two designers in the great temple of the god Amun signed this work. Thanks to them we can also ascribe to their hands another similar group, that of King Thutmosis IV and his mother. Such designers had specialized in the fine and decorative arts, the practice of which was handed down from father to son. They knew all the techniques used by the craftsmen under their charge and supervised the joiners, jewelers, goldsmiths, and other artisans. The vizier Rekhmire was in charge of these workshops of the god Amun at Thebes. It was an official of Amun who was commissioned to provide the rich funeral equipment which was bestowed as a royal gift on Yuya and Tuyu. They were the grandparents of Tutankhamun. The treasurer, Maya, commissioned an effigy of Tutankhamun for the king's burial. The men who actually made such things worked under supervision in their studios. Only in their leisure hours could they make something for themselves or for less exalted patrons. A walled village at Deir el-Medina in western Thebes contains the houses in which generations of these artisans lived. Over a period of 5 centuries, from about 1500 BC, they hewed and decorated tombs in the Valley of the Kings and in other royal burial places. This village was divided into 2 parts by a wide street. 1 or 2 narrow lanes joined it at right angles. The houses were built in groups and shared party walls. Their lower courses were constructed of rough blocks of limestone. The upper parts and subsidiary walls were built of mud brick and plastered with mud. Door frames and thresholds were of stone. The houses were 1 story high and were all built on a similar plan, which consisted of a reception room leading into a higher living room, its ceiling supported by 1 or 2 wooden columns which rested on stone bases. From this room, 1 door led into the bedroom and another into the kitchen. A staircase led to the roof, where much of the daily life was spent. This is a drawing of 1 such house in this village. Living conditions today in the rural areas are scarcely any different. The excavation of this site by the French during the interwar years has uncovered many clues that enable us to reconstruct the history of the village. Families of artisans lived in these houses, and their employment was hereditary. For instance, the post of secretary to the community was in the hands of 6 successive members of the same family. The secretaries often wrote on flakes of limestone. Some of these documents record disputes which were settled by a village council. Severe punishments, however, were in the hands of the vizier, who was in supreme charge. He visited the site from time to time to inspect progress and listened to complaints. These were quite frequent and usually concerned shortages in the supply of rations. When protests had no effect, the workmen downed tools. These disputes were the first recorded strikes of history. The artists and craftsmen had labourers to toil for them, to wash their clothes, and to grind their rations of barley and wheat, which provided their basic diet of bread and beer. They were mostly paid in kind, and this food was part of their wages. Fishermen caught perch and other fish for them in the Nile, while lesser servants drew water and hewed wood for their daily needs. Another document, this time on papyrus, is the architect's plan of the tomb of Ramesses IV. This detail shows the sarcophagus surrounded by its shrines. The tomb of the king still survives along with its sarcophagus, but the gilded shrines have, of course, long since disappeared. Careful measurements by the archaeologist Howard Carter show how precisely the workmen followed the architect's plan. The team was divided into 2 gangs, each under the charge of a foreman. One worked on the left and the other on the right-hand side of the tomb. Their working day was surprisingly enough 8 hours, with a break at midday. But their working week consisted of 10 days, During this time, they lived and slept in rough huts near the site. On their rest days and the many feast days, they returned to their homes and families in the village. Some of the artisans were sufficiently well off to prepare tombs for themselves close to their houses. One such tomb is that of the workman Senejem. Here he is shown with his wife, enjoying an idyllic pastoral life in the afterworld. In view of the sensational ideas that still persist, that the royal tombs were hewn by gangs of slaves toiling under the lash of a taskmaster, it is reassuring to learn that the workmen of this community enjoyed a fairly high standard of living. They worked an 8-hour day, had regular holidays, their board and lodging was assured, and indeed they had a great deal of independence and self-government in many of their everyday affairs.